Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about government policy and human rights. Welcome back to Policy and Rights here on Depictions Media Radio. I'm your host, Michael Clogs. The whole world is watching for de-escalation as combat expands throughout the Middle East. That after a few days ago we saw that Iran had fired missiles at Israel, and that the Israeli Defense Forces had moved into Lebanon. There was a promise that Israel would defend its country, and which brought about questions of what that really means and how far it should it be allowed for Israel to defend itself against its enemies. Should they be allowed to invade another country, move troops across, cause and wage war and cause destruction even further? The next question, of course, is should Iran's actions of firing missiles at Israel, should that go unsanctioned, or what action should be taken against them for, again, waging war and firing on an enemy and saying that it was in defense of one of their sister countries in defense of course, Gaza and Lebanon. How far should this be allowed to go, and what kind of intervention is the United Nations and other nations around the world going to take to stop the war from happening? What is really going to happen to protect civilian lives and to bring humanitarian efforts to those who need it, and to rehouse those who have been displaced? We're going to hear a number of ministers speaking about this and what the Liberal government should be doing, especially to protect Canadians. We're going to hear that, there are a number of flights available to get Canadian citizens out and Canadian passport holders. There is going to be some confusion in the number of people that actually means. Is it 40,000? Is it 20,000? How many people do they need to find flights for in order to bring people to safety and bring people and their families to a place of safety? There's a lot of questions, and at this point, not a lot of answers to those questions. So we're going to hear Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, as he is going to be quoted saying, the raging fires are fast becoming an inferno, meaning that all the wars that are being waged around the world and all the destruction that is happening is fastly becoming an inferno of people suffering and government sending militaries into action. It has been stated that many do not want to see another world war happen, but if the Middle East is raging in war the way it is, how many countries are going to jump in and want to get involved? It may not become like World War II, but it could be like a situation we saw in Afghanistan, where generations of soldiers were sent one after another, raging for nearly 20 years before someone like President Biden decided to bring it to an end. Is it going to be something like Vietnam, where troops get sent and lives lost and families devastated over and over again, with young men being drafted around the world to fight a war that is happening in the Middle East? What are we really looking at with this? How is this going to end if we do not find a diplomatic way of bringing the fighting to an end? There have been calls for ceasefires. We're going to hear that from the Russian representative to the United Nations say that he vaguely says that the United States is blocking some of the peace that is happening. We have posted in past episodes that where the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Canada is saying that she's trying to get the United States to sell more weapons that are Canadian built to Israel, which would continue a war. Is it a situation where, once again, the corporations are trying to make masses of amount of money and capital over the bodies of the simple people? It is the simple people, those who are like you and I, that are left to suffer. It is also left to us to stop our governments from doing what they're doing, and how we do that is by casting votes for those elected officials that will ignore the greed and work for the peace. They will ignore the corruption of the corporations and listen to the love that is built into our world. So why don't we're going to start off and we're going to listen to a couple clips from the United Nations, and then we'll listen to some of what the Canadian government, the Liberal government ministers had to say about what is happening in the Middle East right now.
Madam President, Excellencies, the raging fires in the Middle East are fast becoming an inferno. Exactly 1 week ago, I briefed the Security Council about the alarming situation in Lebanon. Since then, things have gone from bad to much, much worse. As I told the Council last week, the Blue Line has seen tensions for years. But since October, exchanges of fire have expanded in scope, depth, and intensity. I stated that almost daily exchanges of fire by Hezbollah and other non-state armed groups in Lebanon and the Israel Defense Forces are in repeated violation of Security Council Resolution 1701. I emphasize that the daily use of weapons by non-state armed groups is in violation of Security Council Resolutions 1559 and 1701. And I stressed that Lebanese sovereignty and territorial integrity must be respected, and the Lebanese state must have full control of weapons throughout Lebanon. Madam President, in the few short days since then, we have seen a dramatic escalation, so dramatic that I wonder what remains of the framework this Council established with Resolution 1701. Israel forces have conducted relentless airstrikes across Lebanon, including Beirut. The United States and France, with the support of several other countries, have proposed a temporary ceasefire allowing for the restart of negotiations. Israel refused that proposal and stepped up its strikes, including bombing the Hezbollah headquarters where its leader was killed. And Hezbollah has continued rocket and missile attacks on Israel. And yesterday, the Israel Defense Forces conducted what it stated were limited incursions into southern Lebanon. UNIFIL peacekeepers remain in position, and the UN flag continues to fly despite Israel's request to relocate. I reiterate our deep appreciation to the military and civilian members of our UN peacekeeping force, UNIFIL, and to troop contributing countries. The safety and security of all UN personnel must be ensured. Madam President, civilians are paying a terrible price, which I utterly condemn. Since last October, more than 1,700 people have been killed in Lebanon, including over 100 children and 194 women. Over 346,000 people are confirmed to have been displaced from their homes, and government estimates put this number as high as 1 million. Another 128,000 people, both Syrian and Lebanese, have crossed into Syria. The UN has mobilized all its capacities to provide urgent humanitarian aid in Lebanon, and I ask the international community to fully fund our appeal. Since October 8th, Hezbollah attacks on Israel have killed 49 people, with over 60,000 people displaced from their homes. It is absolutely essential to avoid an all-out war in Lebanon, which would have profound and devastating consequences. Madam President, yesterday Iran launched approximately 200 ballistic missiles towards Israel. It stated it was in response to the killings of Hassan Nasrallah and the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps Commander Abbas Nilforushan last week, as well as that of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran in July. Millions of people across Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory were forced to seek shelter. One person was killed from the Iranian strikes, a Palestinian in the occupied West Bank. As I did in relation to the Iranian attack in April, and as should have been obvious yesterday, In the context of the condemnation I expressed, I again strongly condemn yesterday's massive missile attack by Iran on Israel. And these attacks, paradoxically, do nothing to support the cause of the Palestinian people or reduce their suffering. Almost 1 year has passed since the atrocious 7 October acts of terror by Hamas and the taking of hostages. And since last October, Israel has conducted in Gaza the most deadly and destructive military campaign in my years as Secretary General. The suffering endured by the Palestinian people in Gaza is beyond imagination. At the same time, the situation in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, continues to deteriorate with Israeli military operations, construction of settlements, evictions, land grabs, and intensification of settler attacks, progressively undermining any possibility of a two-state solution. And simultaneously, armed Palestinian groups have also used violence. Hamas has continued to launch rockets, and just yesterday, 7 Israelis were killed in a terror attack in Jaffa. Madam President, the events of the past week, the past months, and indeed nearly the past year make it clear. It's high time for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, with the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, the effective delivery of humanitarian aid to Palestinians in Gaza, and irreversible progress to a two-state solution. It's high time for a cessation of hostilities in Lebanon, re-election towards full implementation of Security Council resolutions 1559 and 1701, paving the way for diplomatic efforts for sustainable peace. It's high time to stop the sickening cycle of escalation after escalation that is leading the people of the Middle East straight over the cliff. Each escalation has served as a pretext for the next. We must never lose sight of the tremendous toll this growing conflict is taking on civilians. And we cannot look away from systematic violations of international humanitarian law. This deadly cycle of tit-for-tat violence must stop. Time is running out, and I thank you.
Dear colleagues, thank you very much for coming. I wanted to gather you to inform you about one outrageous incident that happened during the high-level week. Your colleague, Valentin Bogdanov, the correspondent of the All-Union Tele and Radio Broadcasting Corporation, was going to the press conference of Annalena Baerbock, the German foreign minister, and on the way he asked her a question on something about peace prospects for Ukraine. She preferred not to answer. He continued to follow her without harassing whatever. Suddenly, a German either press officer or a security guard came out and started to assault Mr. Bogdanov with his hands. Valentin asked to leave him alone, but that continued while he was proceeding to the press conference by the German foreign minister. Later we learned that Valentin was stripped of his UN pass. I wrote a letter yesterday to the Secretary General and sent him a personal message saying that this is absolutely unacceptable and we demand that this decision be revoked immediately. The Secretary General promised that he will attend the matter. That's the main reason why I asked you to come here, because we believe that this is again an outrageous incident. If the one that deserves to be stripped of the access to the UN was the German guy assaulting your colleague.
Was there any justification for what happened?
I have no idea. There is a viral video on the internet. You can watch yourself and then decide for yourself whether it was that was deserving the measures that were taken immediately. We don't know even by whom. But again, I addressed the Secretary General immediately, and we want this to be rectified in the near future.
Ambassador, in that meeting you warned of unimaginable escalation if things continue in the direction they're going in the Middle East. What is your message to your allies in Tehran?
Look, Iran is a sovereign country. It takes decisions by itself. And I said in my statement that Iran demonstrated incredible restraint for over 2 months. And as the Iranian ambassador just said, we've been asked, I believe indirectly, by the U.S. not to retaliate or whatever while they were conducting the so-called peace talks on the ceasefire, which never happened. But then, again, I said it in my statement, we have an impression from the statements by our Western colleagues as if the Iranian attack is the beginning, is the start of the whole thing. I mean, it didn't happen in the vacuum. It was preceded by a number of events which still continue, including the recent events in Lebanon and before that and now in Gaza. So to be puzzled by what happened is at least not becoming of serious people who are following the political and military events in the Middle East. And we've been warning long time, not just us, but many of my colleagues, that what's happening in the Middle East with the conduct of the Israeli military operation may lead to the wider conflict, to its expansion over the whole Middle East, with the potential spillover even further.
Ambassador, do you think Iran alert did Iran alert Russia?
I don't hear.
Did Iran alert Russia before launching its missile attack?
I have no idea. Again, Iran is a sovereign country; it takes decisions by itself.
There's a media report that says Iran notified Russia before it.
Can you say it again?
Mr. Ambassador.
Double standard here. Every Western country talk about the right of Israel to self-defense,
Yes.
but they deny that right to Iran, Syria.
We see double standards everywhere, and that is one of the examples.
Mr. Ambassador, speaking about sovereign countries and member states, what's your take on the decision by the Israeli government to consider the UN Secretary General a persona non grata, and does the norms of diplomacy and the UN Charter allows them to do such action?
I referred to this in my statement today. I think, again, I will use the word for the second time today, outrageous and arrogant, unbecoming for the UN country member that came to existence because of the UN, in fact. And I think that the Council should address the issue and should call on Israel to revoke it.
How worried are you, Ambassador, by the situation? How worried are you?
Just one final question, please.
How are you by the situation in the Middle East? You've had decades of experience.
Very simple.
How dangerous is it?
Secretary General today told that he wonders what is left of Resolution 1701. So do you think that Security Council needs a new document on de-escalation between Lebanon and Israel?
We'll have informal consultations right after the meeting, and we'll see what products may be proposed by Council members. But unfortunately, whatever considers Middle East, whatever considers addressing Israel, even indirectly, is being blocked all the time by one country, the name of which you perfectly know.
Do you think Israel's actions are trying to influence the U.S. election?
That's a question. That's a question that my intellect cannot conquer. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Can I ask you?
All right. Thank you for bearing with us. Just on the health front and Lebanon, of course, the World Health Organization tells us that they and their partners are continuing to support Lebanon's health system by providing medical supplies and technical assistance. For its part, the World Food Programme is scaling up its emergency food assistance to reach up to 1 million people impacted by the current crisis. The World Food Programme has also been working with donors and partners for several months to stockpile food supplies in strategic areas. Also, our World Food Program colleagues are actively supporting vulnerable Syrian refugees and the most at-risk Lebanese people in Lebanon. Unfortunately, as Mr. Lacroix just said, funding shortfalls at one point in the beginning of the year made it necessary to reduce food assistance to those who need it the most. Also, UNHCR tells us that they and their humanitarian partners are scaling up their efforts to assist both Syrian and Lebanese families crossing the border. And in such circumstances, as you well know, women and children are bearing the brunt of this conflict. That's why our colleagues at the UN Population Fund are supporting 17 safe spaces for women and girls across Lebanon. And our humanitarian coordinator, Imran Riza, who leads the humanitarian response for Lebanon, spoke today about how he deplores the dangerous escalation, saying that some of the attacks that we have seen that disrupt the delivery of essential services, delay life-saving medical care, and violate people's fundamental rights to access health care must not happen. Also, turning to Gaza, the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs tell us they're very concerned about the toll of repeated airstrikes on shelters for displaced people on the Strip. In recent days, at least 6 schools serving as shelters for displaced people have been struck. That's in addition to a deadly strike on Al Amal Institute for Orphans yesterday, which has also been serving as a shelter in the west of Gaza City. Once again, OCHA stresses that international humanitarian law demands that the parties take constant care to spare civilians from harm. Civilians must be protected and their essential needs must be met. OCHA tells us that our humanitarian partners are continuing to provide treatment to malnourished children in Gaza despite the limited entry of critical supplies and the loss of access to some of the humanitarian warehouses. Even in the face of these challenges, humanitarian partners screened more than 24,000 children in Gaza for malnutrition last month alone, bringing the total screened since mid-January to nearly 319,000 children under the age of 5. This includes more than 70,000 children in Gaza's northern governorate. All screened children, nearly 22,000 have been diagnosed with acute malnutrition. In September, nearly 50,000 children under the age of 5, as well more than 18,000 pregnant or breastfeeding women, received supplementary feeding. However, OCHA warns that partners have limited ability to store supplies that require refrigeration. In September and to date, World Food Program reached nearly 900,000 vulnerable people in Gaza and in the West Bank, including more than 688,000 in Gaza alone. This is significantly below the usual number of people reached by the World Food Program as a result of Israeli-imposed bureaucratic hurdles, lack of security guarantees within Gaza, and insufficient border crossing points. Forced population movements have also disrupted the capacity of partners to maintain operations and distribute items, including food, to those who are in need of it. The World Food Program provided over 9.4 million hot meals through a network of 72 community kitchens, and through that they reached 186,161 people in September. While hot meals and the distribution of fresh bread through bakeries continues, WFP will no longer distribute food baskets through its general food distributions across Gaza in October, as the flow of essential goods has been critically restricted. And in the West Bank, we and our partners are gearing up to support Palestinian farmers during the annual olive harvest. OCHA and its partners warn that access restrictions and widespread settler violence pose high risks and challenges for these farmers, potentially undermining their livelihoods. At present, more than 9,600 hectares of olive cultivated land remain unharvested because of access restrictions. The result has been the loss of estimated 1,200 metric tons of last year's olive oil harvest. This morning, back here, just across the hall in the Security Council, James Swan, who is the acting special representative for Somalia and head of the UN assistance mission there, briefed the council on the situation in Somalia. He pointed out that while making commendable efforts to sustain military operations against al-Shabaab, Somalia is at the same time tackling the challenges of forced generation, taking over security responsibilities from the African Union Transition Mission in Somalia, planning the transition to the proposed African Union Support and Stabilization Mission in Somalia, and implementing crucial stabilization programs in recovered areas. He said the UN continues to support the federal government on these activities, working closely with the African Union and other partners. Mr. Swan added that Somalia's humanitarian and development challenges are intensified by climate shocks, warning that scarcity of resources and displacement communities are in turn driving conflict. He stressed that building greater resilience to the effect of climate change is essential for Somalia's stability. Turning to Ukraine, Matthias Schmale, the humanitarian coordinator in that country, was in Kharkiv yesterday, on the same day that an attack on an apartment block injured civilians. Mr. Schmale stressed that we must do everything possible to ensure that the war in Ukraine is not normalized and that civilians and civilian infrastructure are protected. This is especially important given the repeated attacks on energy facilities with winter fast approaching. Our humanitarian colleagues noted that there were more than 50 attacks in Kharkiv last month, injuring more than 190 people, including children. This is according to the authorities there. Meanwhile, the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says that hostilities in the frontline areas of Donetsk and Kherson regions yesterday and today also reportedly result in dozens of civilian casualties and damage to civilian infrastructure. Humanitarian workers delivered assistance to those people in need in those areas. And also want to flag the continued issues of challenges of flooding in West and Central Africa. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that floods have reached catastrophic level with more than 5 million people in 16 countries impacted so far this year. Chad, Niger, and Nigeria are among the hardest hit, being home to more than 80% of people affected. At least 740,000 people have been displaced in hundreds of thousands of homes. More than 100 schools and dozens of health facilities have been damaged. Nearly 500,000 acres of farmland have also been affected. Without sufficient support, the flood threatened to hinder the reopening of schools, with new school year set to begin this month. The floods could also aggravate existing food insecurity, particularly in Chad as well as in Niger. The precarious living conditions of people affected by the floods also increase the risk of waterborne diseases such as cholera, which is spreading in many regions of Niger and Nigeria. Humanitarian partners are mobilized and are supporting the response, including in food and health assistance, but efforts are limited due to financial resources or lack thereof. In that vein, Joyce Masuya, our acting emergency relief coordinator, has allocated $35 million from the Central Emergency Response Fund for flood relief in Chad, in Niger, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and the Congo, but more money is needed. A quick note from Abyei, where our colleagues there are reporting that the peacekeeping mission and the UN country team have intensified their efforts to support communities following heavy rains that caused flooding. According to OCHA, more than 18,000 people in Abyei have been impacted or displaced by the floods. Within Abyei are facing critical situation compounded by existing food insecurity and disease outbreak. Colleagues from the UN peacekeeping mission have constructed 4 channels in Abyei town to facilitate the water flow and help those trapped by floodwaters to move to safety. They're also rehabilitating roads to improve access to humanitarian assistance and enable displaced families to return to their homes. Additionally, the peacekeeping mission is distributing essential supplies to those in need, and those supplies include food, they include mosquito nets, clothing, hygiene product, and we continue to foster dialogue with local women. And in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the peacekeepers there tell us they've deployed a patrol to the villages of Jissa and Okapi, which is in southeast Jugu in Ituri province. This followed reports of gunfire from members of the Zaire militia, and we can also tell you that those militia members withdrew following the arrivals of UN peacekeepers. The mission also sent night patrols to protect civilians in response to an alert received by a potential attack of the Codeco armed group, also in the Jugu area. And the peacekeeping mission, in coordination with the UN Mine Action Service and the Congolese armed forces, conducted an operation to clear unexploded ordnances from Rumoka, northwest of Goma. And winter is oncoming, so this could be important. The World Meteorological Organization and the International Ski and Snowboard Federation have announced a new partnership that will, among other things, highlight the harmful effects of climate change on winter sports and winter tourism. This is the first time our colleagues at WMO have partnered with a sports federation. In addition to working together to highlight the impacts of rising global temperature on snow and ice cover, the collaboration will aim to establish practical initiatives to strengthen scientific and sporting dialogue. More information online. 2 more notes quickly. Senior personnel appointment. The Secretary General announced the appointment of Madalena Sepulveda Carmona of Chile as Director of the UN Research Institute for Social Development, otherwise known as UNSRISD. Ms. Sepulveda succeeds Paul Ladd of the United Kingdom, to whom the Secretary General is grateful for his dedicated service and leadership of the Institute. The Secretary General also wishes to extend his appreciation to Katja Hudjo, Senior Research Coordinator, who will continue to serve as the acting director of the Institute until Ms. Sepulveda assumes her position. She is currently the Executive Director of the Global Initiative for Economic, Social Rights and Senior Researcher Associate at UNTRISD. Why do you come here? You come here to learn, and I like to teach. And we also like to thank. So, money from a member state. Maggie, I'm looking at you. That's a good thing. We just got money from a member state which boasts the largest mangrove forest in the world. It's the UNESCO protected reserve forest. What country could that be? What? No. Okay. So what country did you say? Bangladesh. Yes. The name of the forest is Sundarbans Reserve Forest. Did you also know that Bangladesh has the 3rd longest beach in the world around Cox's Bazar? What?
I wish you led with this.
Yes, exactly. Some people are more into mangrove forest, others into beach time.
The longest one is in my hometown.
Yes, and what is the name? What is the name of that beach?
Casino.
Yes, and what's the 2nd largest beach in the world? Yes, and what is it called? The 90-mile beach. And hopefully it is 90 miles, but you never know. Okay. Anyway, Errol, please. Congratulations. Now, Maggie, were you trying to jump the line? Errol, do you have a question?
No.
Okay. Gabriel.
Thanks, Steph. Speaking of senior personnel appointments, when do you expect we'll hear something on Martin Griffiths' replacement? Break some news right now?
I think the wheels are turning, and we hope to have something soonish.
Earlier this morning, the E10 were at the stakeout, and they, among other things, voiced their support for the Secretary General and the UN system. What is the Secretary General's reaction?
Thank you.
All right. Number 3 is... last one is, you mentioned 6 schools that have been turned into shelters that were struck in the last several days, including a school that housed orphans. Struck by who?
We believe it was from Israeli fire. The name was the West Orphan School. I don't know if it's still a center for orphans, but it is a shelter.
And is the Secretary General concerned, or should I say, how concerned is he with all of the attention, or much of the attention right now on Lebanon, Iran, Israel, of course, that there are still people being killed every single day in Gaza?
Listen, from our part, we are continuously doing our best to keep every humanitarian crisis in the world up front and center. That's our job. That's our advocacy job. All the people who are suffering, all the civilians who are suffering, deserve the world's attention. It is, in part, also the responsibility of the media to make sure that people's voices are heard. From our part, we will do whatever we can. it is clear and it is concerning that as there's a multiplication of crises, new ones are created and old ones are not solved, right? And so we need to keep our eye on all the balls that are currently in the air. Yes, Madame Georgia.
Thank you, Stefan. On the informal meeting or dinner between the Turkish Cypriot and Greek Cypriot leaders, has the date been finalized?
Yes, the date is October 15th, and obviously we'll share more information with you as we get it, but the dinner right now the informal dinner is right now being planned for 15 October.
Thank you.
Maggie, you may speak.
Thank you. Yesterday, I believe you mentioned that some money had come in for the flash appeal for Lebanon, and you said you were going to get back to us with numbers. Do you have any today?
I do not have those numbers, unfortunately.
Okay, and then...
Displaced people in Lebanon, and we have continuously looked at further ways in which we can help.
Are you worried about the ground operation? It's targeted, but that is going on in southern Lebanon.
Well, any escalation in the conflict is of serious concern to us. We have, in addition to the people of Lebanon, we have tens of thousands of Canadians in Lebanon, and so we're very concerned about the conflict spreading to Lebanon, and we urge both sides to cease hostilities. I mean, this war doesn't serve anyone's interest, and we hope that the parties can de-escalate.
Do you feel that the Netanyahu government at this point is an obstacle to peace in the region?
No, that's not what I said. I said that the conflict spreading to Lebanon is not helpful to anyone. It doesn't serve anyone's interest, and it has the potential of causing further displacement and death of civilians on both sides.
Is this going to speed up any evacuation plans? Last week, Vani said that the plans were ready to go. Yeah. So is this going to start an evacuation for Canadians?
Well, we'll always have more to say when the time comes to do that. However, we've been getting ready for this type of scenario for months, but we've been urging Canadian citizens to get out of Lebanon using commercial means, which are still available.
And so when you're saying you're waiting for the time, what's the time? What is it?
Well, you'll hear from Minister Joly on that, as well as Minister Blair.
The death of the Hezbollah leader, is that productive or not?
Look, I mean, Hezbollah is a listed terrorist organization, so I don't know what you want me to say beyond that. What I can tell you is that the escalation of this conflict to Lebanon is not helpful to anyone, and has already caused civilian deaths, displacement of tens of thousands of people, and that's why we're providing $10 million of initial humanitarian aid to the people of Lebanon, and this will lead to more hostilities in the region. And we've worked with our allies to try to make sure this conflict doesn't spread to Lebanon, and sadly it's happening, and we hope that the parties can come to their senses and cease fire.
Do you believe that what Israel's calling a limited ground incursion in southern Lebanon amounts to an invasion, also given their attacks on Beirut?
Look, any escalation in the conflict is not something that we support. And
right, but is it an invasion?
We've called on both sides not to escalate.
But are you in favor?
What's? Yeah, am I in favor of what?
Are you in favor of an emergency debate in the House of Commons on this?
I haven't seen any request to have one. Have they? Okay. Any debate in the House is I think healthy and happy to have members of Parliament express their views.
Voting to basically accelerate Canada's recognition of statehood for Palestine. What do you make of that?
Well, the Canadian position is that we believe in a two-state solution as the long-term permanent solution to this conflict. And the Palestinian people have the right to have their state so that they can live in freedom and dignity. And no one should have a veto on that. And we will recognize that state when it's the right time to do so. Thank you.
But Lebanon and what you see happening going on there, does Canada have any information about what exactly Iran's plans are? What are you hearing?
We are following the news reports and speaking to the Americans about the steps that they are taking, concerned about a missile launch. I know people of Israel have been told to shelter in place, and there are legitimate concerns, I think, about an escalation of violence in the region.
And can you speak to what the military's role is going to be in the evacuation plan? Have you sent more assets in? What are you doing?
We have. We've
What have you sent in? Don't use the word asset. I mean, what exactly have you sent in there to help?
Right now, we've sent a number of our people into the region. We have about 200 people in the area right now, but we're increasing that number as may be required. We are also looking at air assets and the potential use of helicopter assets. Those things are being determined now. It's part of the pre-planning that we've already invested in the area. We have facilities and plans set up in place in both Cyprus and in Turkey, and we're also right now relying on the commercial airline options that are available to us. GAC, I think, has done some extraordinary work in securing seats on those planes for Canadians who want to leave. And we're still getting Canadians in the region who are registering with GAC seeking assistance.
Is there any world in which Canada could put any military assistance in for the military operations there?
No, that's not, what I've deployed assets into the region is at the request of Global Affairs Canada, so that we will have the people that they will need in order to assist Canadians to get to a place of safety.
The IDF is saying, as we acknowledged, that Iran is shooting missiles at Israel. I appreciate it's an evolving situation, but what are the kinds of questions you're asking right now? What is the Canadian government doing as this situation?
Well, again, we are in discussions with our closest allies, particularly the United States, but others also in the region. Our primary concern is the safety of Canadians in the region, and we've been doing a great deal of work in Lebanon and in neighboring countries, Cyprus and Turkey in particular, in order to facilitate the safe departure of those individuals. Right now, we're relying on commercial airlines that are still flying out of the Beirut airport. There's about 6 carriers that are operating out of there and about 60 flights that are scheduled for today. Global Affairs Canada has secured a significant number of spots on planes that we're making available to Canadians to get them to safety. And we are preparing, if there is an escalation of violence in the region, we know that we will be required to do more in order to assist Canadians.
What's your assessment of the risk of that? What is your assessment of the risk of all-out war there? Canada's called for a ceasefire, but nobody's laying down arms.
We have called for a ceasefire. I still remain hopeful. I think we have to remain hopeful that there's a possibility of a ceasefire, a diplomatic resolution of the current conflict, but we're watching with increasing concern about the escalation of violence. The word of Iran launching a missile attack, I think, is a significant escalatory move. Additionally, we saw yesterday Israel began raids into Lebanon, which could be a precursor to a greater incursion, and so we're watching with growing concern. But we are increasing our capacity to respond to the needs of Canadians in the region. Our first responsibility is to get them to safety.
Does that amount to an invasion? Does that amount to an invasion?
At the current time, we understand that, and it's not without precedent, that there are some incursions and some raids that have been taking place immediately across the border. I think, from our perspective, it doesn't amount to a full-scale invasion, but it could be preparatory to that, and so we're watching with increasing concern, and we are still calling for a ceasefire and working very closely with allies to try to achieve a diplomatic resolution.
What are the airports or as a means of getting people out at this point?
Right now, the airport is still a viable option. As I said, there's 6 carriers and about 60 flights that have left there just today. We're continuing to contract over the next 3 or 4 days for additional flights, and we'll continue to use that point of egress as long as it's available to us. Right now, it is still available, and we're going to continue to use it. But in the event that the airport is forced to close down, we have other options that we're also.
Did any Canadians come out today? Did any Canadians take you up on those seats today?
I understand 96 Canadians left yesterday. I'm not sure that, I don't believe there is a chartered flight going today, but Canadians are also taking advantage of existing other charter options. They're contracting directly with airlines because there are 6 carriers and about 60 flights that have departed Beirut today. And we know that over the past several months, a lot of Canadians have been taking the very good advice that's been offered to them by Global Affairs Canada to leave the region as a prudent measure and to ensure their safety. But we know that some have been struggling to find ways of egress, and people are registering with Canada. Approximately 4,000 people have registered with us, not all of them seeking departure assistance, but there are a sufficient number of Canadians.
4,000?
Yeah, and that's the number of people that have actually registered with Global Affairs in
I thought it was over 20,000.
Well, 20,000 is the number of people we estimate could be required. But
I thought that was 40,000.
Well, and again, not everybody's going to want to leave.
How many Lebanese Canadians are there?
Well, we estimated at the beginning of the conflict approximately 40,000 Canadian passport holders, some permanent residents, and their families that we could potentially be required to assist. But at the same time, we've been issuing warnings for the past several months to Canadians in the region to make the right choice and to get to a place of safety. And I think many have taken us up on that. But we know that for a number of reasons, some people may not have made that choice. And it does not relieve us of our responsibility to make sure that we're there for help Canadians.
But what's the 4,000 number? What is the 4,000?
At what point would Canada consider the situation in Lebanon an invasion?
And again, I think we're continuing to monitor that situation very carefully, and I don't want to use escalatory language. We are still working towards a ceasefire and a diplomatic resolution of this conflict, and at the same time, Canada is taking the steps that are necessary so that we will be able to assist Canadians in the region get to a place of safety.
Minister Blair, what is the 4,000 number you just used?
About 4,000 people have registered with the consulate seeking information and assistance in departure.
And so the number that GAC has been using, more than 23,000 registered, what are they?
Well, we know that there are Canadians in the region, but they are not seeking assistance to depart at this present time. The numbers are lower, and we're working through that number as quickly as possible to assist those people in their departure.
So your planning is around 4,000 wanting to leave, wanting help to leave, rather.
Our planning is for the potential of how many Canadians may require assistance, and it's a scalable response. But we're also dealing with the current situation, which so far about 4,000 Canadians have registered with Global Affairs seeking information and assistance in departure. And that's the number we're dealing with now.
And you'll scale up to 20?
We'll scale up as required. If more Canadians come in, we are prepared to do what is ever required to ensure that we provide necessary assistance, consular assistance, and departure assistance to Canadians in the region. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.